For this podcast, we're going to be looking at the actual legitimate solution for the bureaucratic problems that we actually see in DC. Now, we're going to be looking at the Mueller report as the actual legitimacy of showing that we do have an actual bureaucratic problem. Now, beyond actually seeing the actual legitimate waste that we've actually seen in DC itself, we can actually see that there was actually a legitimate coup. We're going to start by actually asking people to, before we get to the actual points, we're going to start by asking people to please donate to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/challengehistory. And you'll, if you go to that page, you will see that there's tiers from $1 all the way down to at $1, $10, $25, $50, and $100. When we hit a certain threshold, which will at least be a few people, I want at least 5 or more people at these levels each at $50 and $100. And when we reach those, we will have a giveaway for one per year, and this will be for the $50 will be for the silver Roman Empire coin, and the $100 level will be for a gold Byzantine Empire coin for one winner of each. And I'll actually order that from APMEX, the American Precious Metals Index, or American Precious Metals Exchange. Sorry for my mistake. And so it's a reputable precious metals dealer that I actually get my own precious metals from, for my own personal collection. And it's just something that'll be a little bit interesting for someone to have. And for the other ones, when I hit certain thresholds, I'll create giveaways for those as well. And then when we start to hit higher levels, we'll probably raise the number of giveaways for those points. I might do certain things like interesting coin collection giveaways from different countries. But you'll see on this with it that I'm on disability, and it helps to pay for the equipment for the podcast, for me being able to establish a income, and for the other costs for my disability and other factors in my life as well that you'll read about here on the actual page. I also do have down here on February 23rd that I posted kind of a little bit of an intro that's basically thanking people for any of their donations as well. Now, basically on the thing with it, it basically goes on to the point of where Graham is bringing up the point of an actual probe onto this attempted coup by the FBI and the Department of Justice that was essentially running roughshod over everything. Now, the fact is it needs to be understood. One major thing is that you'll have people like Elizabeth Warren saying that they're against this whole thing, and Lindsey Graham being for it. But the fact is, while those people don't exactly have the best scores for upholding Constitution, we must still look beyond that actual point, and we need to actually look at what the actual problem is with the bureaucracy. Now, the bureaucracy itself has been a problem for both parties, and the actual solution that's always been applied for basically the last 100+ years has been, there's a problem with a bureaucratic department. Okay, well, we'll get another bureaucratic department to look over that one other department. There's a problem with this next bureaucratic department. Well, we'll get another bureaucratic department to go over it. Well, what this does is this makes the government larger, and it doesn't actually solve the actual problem. The only way to solve the problem is to destroy the actual initial problem that was existing. And you need to eliminate that one problem that existed to begin with and actually destroy it in its actual source. I mean, if a doctor saw cancer within the body, they're not going to put more cancer in the body that you actually felt was going to essentially overcome the first, because you're just adding more cancer. Now, that's not a real solution. This almost mimics the idea of forgot the name of the Looney Tunes cartoon, where basically you have Daffy Duck is the owner of a hotel, and Porky Pig is actually staying at the hotel, and Daffy Duck sends in a mouse into the room, and Porky Pig says, "I want to get rid of the mouse," and they keep going up and up for he keeps going up and up for the different things to get rid of all these animals, and eventually comes to where there's an elephant in the room, and then to get rid of the elephant, he basically sends in back the mouse again, and keeps going in a big circle. And it almost mimics what the government kind of does, and it's basically a whole big problem of what the bureaucratic system is, and it almost mimics it. And I know it's kind of talking about animation in this point, but it's kind of a silly topic to bring up, but this is government we're talking about, and you have to kind of sometimes make these analogies, because there's nothing that really makes sense when it comes to their actions, because their actions aren't built within logic. Because the logical approach would be, if you have a problem, get rid of it. You don't essentially make it bigger. You don't add another problem to fix the first problem. You say to the first problem, you say, we're going to get rid of you. Now we can actually look at in this from the Libertarian Republic. This is from Josh Gukert, who is who actually added from a political opinion as a guest post in April 7th of 2015 of 10 government agencies we should eliminate immediately. This is basically going and getting rid of these government wastes. And he starts out with the National Security Agency, and he makes the point with Edward Snowden, showing that the NSA has basically been spying on people for a long time, and it basically shows that they've been an Orwellian agency since its creation in 1952, and by President Truman. Now we go on to the second one. We go with the FDA. Now the FDA essentially looks over medications. Well, the fact is they regulate what people eat, drink, and medicate themselves with. Well, if we look at that, they essentially pick. That's another one that we can get rid of, because they actually, what they do is they essentially block the ability for people to for drugs to come onto the market, and they're doing this with the ability for certain companies to have the ability to control the market, the whole marketplace, and this is a big problem, and we need to understand this. And this is something which is a big issue. It has been a problem, and if you look at the Constitution, it only guarantees people the ability to have their inventions, to have the right to have them come to market to where they become profitable, not to where they actually can have other companies have their have competition blocked. That's not the job of the government. The government isn't to block competition. And what we're seeing is this is what they're doing. They're blocking them. We go on to number 3. We're seeing the EPA. Now the EPA has gone from a small regulatory thing, which was initially set to set people to just protect in certain small cases, to basically change to where they're basically controlling citizens' actions across the board. I mean, we've had essentially the situation to where they essentially could trample the lives of small businesses while basically giving big businesses little slaps on the wrist while allowing them to receive corporate welfare to essentially return all the money that was taken in fines. And it's essentially picking winners, and they're aiding this picking winners and losers. And they've been basically led to guard this idea of changing around what is environmental protection, and it's going against what would be legitimate. Now, if we go to a libertarian solution, we could actually change this around by merely allowing people to enforce the idea of private property. Private property could actually fix this whole idea, and this is something that would fix the issues and eliminate the whole need for an EPA. The EPA merely just picks winners and losers on the whole scale. We look at Amtrak. Now, Amtrak essentially is just a huge boondoggle that doesn't need to exist on the government scale. We look at the actual prices of Amtrak, and we can actually see that in many cases it's actually cheaper to actually fly than it is to actually take Amtrak. And yet certain congressmen are able to basically tout their actual taking Amtrak, which they're basically taking it because they're actually using the money in allowances, and they're doing this even though it's a failing system. Now, if we were able to replace this with an actual private system, it would actually be much more affordable, number one, and number two, we could see that it would actually run a lot better. We wouldn't see these crashes that would actually be happening as they have been. When we compare it with some even local transit systems, we can see Amtrak is far more expensive when we compare it, and this is just on the federal scale. And this is comparing train travel to train travel, just even on local public systems. And if you were to actually make it a private train system, it would be much more affordable. And if you compare the option for cross-country travel for other options, such as Greyhound, you can actually travel much cheaper on Greyhound for about half the price than you can with Amtrak. And that's on bus next to actually traveling on a train, which you're forced on a specific route. As we can see, that's a huge boondoggle. Next one's the Internal Revenue Service. Now, we can actually look at the actual system. If we're going to look at the way states run, we can see that states merely just run their funding directly to the actual system of their own Department of Finance itself, which the federal government has a Department of Finance. Now, even beyond this, we know that the IRS has a system of abusing its power targeting specific groups for special audits, targeting people that they don't like, and they tend to want to abuse citizens themselves as well. And so when we're looking at it, is not only is it essentially a pointless agency and a duplicate agency, it really is an agency that's been used to abuse its power. And when it comes down to it, is we can talk about what the actual function is. Now if we go on to number 6, we can look at FEMA, which is under Homeland Security. Now if we look at private organizations, we know that private organizations have done a much better job, and it doesn't matter which event we're talking about for any type of catastrophic event. They're always there before the government gets there, because the government has to go through all of its bureaucratic mess, and by the time everything has already been done, that's usually when FEMA arrives, and FEMA tends to just get in time to take the credit. And it's under Homeland Security, which is a larger system as well, which they would have to then deal with the whole point of taking orders from Homeland Security as well, which means it would take even longer. And we can basically leave this to private charities themselves to take care of everything and leave it alone. And most often, states, if they were to actually budget for these things themselves, instead of basically stating we're going to leave this to the federal government, would actually be perfectly fine in being set for these instances without this happening. But the federal government is taking money out of these regions to actually support these government agencies to begin with. Next we have the TSA. Now we could basically look, when it comes to the TSA, we can obviously understand that they are a complete and utter boondoggle. Number one, when they've been tested to find bombs, they've actually produced rates of between anywhere between a 80 and a 95% failure depending on the test. Now this is pathetic. Now if their best produced number is about an 80% failure rate, which means getting 20% finding 20% of the bombs when they've been pretty much notified of the test in advance, this means this means they're completely and utterly incompetent. But yet we keep putting more and more money into it. The 80% test is basically even at the highest levels of money that we pumped in. This means at our current rates, we would basically have to pump so much money into them that if we were to say that money is a solution for them, that we would have to pump so much money into them that they would basically be such a boondoggle that it wouldn't even be affordable anymore. And it would raise the price of tickets to basically where they would be close to 4 to 5 times their actual cost of what they are now. Most likely about 5 times the cost. So in these tickets that you would normally say, okay, I'm going to travel and it's currently about, let's say, $160 right now, you could pretty much guarantee that price is going to be about $800 after they've raised it up to being an efficient level. And we know that if we wanted to get a definite, efficient way of doing this, they would actually rely upon the companies themselves, the airlines. Now, the airlines actually have an actual interest in making sure their passengers are not killed. The government, on the other hand, doesn't have that interest. They just have the interest in the illusion of security. They don't have an interest in the actual real security of the people, because there is no actual detriment if a plane explodes or is sent into a building. They don't have any negative outcome of that. When it comes to the actual company, they get hit in their stocks. They get hit in the number of customers that want to fly. That's a very, very bad thing. So happens the same thing with the company that makes the planes. They don't want that. Doesn't matter if we're talking about Airbus or if we're talking about Boeing. They don't want that. Neither of them want that. Now, Boeing does get helped out with the military contracts that they have, but it still does affect them for the other planes they do make, which is a good chunk of what they're bringing in. And if they were to switch out and end this agency and basically get rid of it and establish it so basically only the airlines themselves, you would not have the weakness of a bunch of people standing around waiting to get shot, which is a huge security weakness, as well as a waste of money. And you would not have and you would have each airline taking care of their own security, which allows people to choose what's more important on the level of security and price. Now we have the next one, which is the Drug Enforcement Administration. Now when we start to look at the whole thing with it, now not only have they been basically been essentially guilty of basically not being efficient when it comes onto the war on drugs to begin with, because we could see that they've been both bringing in drugs and trying to stop drugs, which allows them to continue their funding. We need to also understand that they've also been abusive as an agency, and also where their actual authority comes from. Their authority doesn't come from any constitutional ruling. It comes from an actual law that was actually passed through the authority of a UN agenda. That's it. It was never actually constitutional. When we actually look to the Constitution, we actually find to ban substances, you actually need a constitutional amendment. Why do we know this? Because we know this through actually looking through the way that they handled alcohol. And we can't say, oh, but more people use alcohol than use illicit drugs. Well, it doesn't matter on the amount that use it. It's still the actual standard exists. Once the standard exists that you actually have that. And it doesn't matter that they say, oh, but no judge has rejected it. Doesn't matter that a judge hasn't rejected it. It's still the actual point. This is the way the constitutional standard is written, that any substance would actually be the right of the people to consume regardless. Because if it is not harming another person as being a violent crime, that you're actually free to do it. It might be stupid, which we can agree on, for someone to basically do something that's going to kill themselves, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they need to go to jail for doing something stupid. I mean, should someone go to jail for eating a Tide Pod? No, they're an idiot, but it doesn't mean they should be going to jail for it. Should somebody go to jail because they are jaywalking? No. That would be completely That would be completely overboard. Yes, it's not the brightest thing to do, but that's the whole point. Now we have the FCC. Now, if we actually believe in freedom of speech, the FCC has no bearing in existence. We should understand that. And if you're going to say, oh, but they could say about people could say, oh, but what about if somebody says a bad word on TV? Well, the fact is that's why we have parents. Parents are free to actually make the judgment of others. Now, and this is the way we should view this. And we should also understand that we shouldn't be regulating the idea of speech. And this is something that should never exist. And the FCC is something that is really, it should have never even come into existence to begin with. And it's basically set to regulate freedom of speech. They're trying to, they wanted to state that, oh, these words are bad words, or, we need to, and this was the idea of initially regulating the internet. Well, we don't need the internet regulated. We don't need anything regulated when it comes out to being communications. Now we on to number 10, which is the Federal Reserve. Now the Federal Reserve Bank is basically this is established in 1913. Problem being is it's not really government, not really private. It exists in this kind of quasi-private situation. That's the problem. And this is where we have an issue with them. And this is something in which they allow them to control the monetary policy of the United States. Now, since this point, they point out here that they've lost, it's lost 95% of the value. It's actually closer to about 97% of the value of the U.S. dollar. And when people try to say, oh, but a lot of people gain wealth, well, if since then, when they try to look at these, salaries have gone up. Well, yes, the salaries have gone up for people, but if you actually equate it out to the numbers, it doesn't equate out to the amount that's through inflation that's would actually be proper for the actual time. They would have actually lost quite a bit of their money, and that would actually be quite a bit behind in the actual numbers. And when we start to now, there's actually other agencies that we can actually see that actually need to go because of what we see with their actual the actual permanent bureaucracy that's been there. And I think we can. This is just 10 right here. I mean, there's plenty more. These are just 10 that have actually legitimately do not even need to exist. And we can actually say another one is the FBI. We can say the CIA as well. We frankly do not even need any existence of civilian intelligence. Civilian intelligence is actually their only existence is actually for secrecy. They have they do not take any oath to the Constitution. The Constitution is considered to be negligible to them. They do not feel that the Constitution really matters. And this is a huge problem. Because every government official should be taking an oath to the Constitution itself as written. And if they can't follow the Constitution, they have no business being there. And it should be taken in a literal sense. Not this idea of either A, picking and choosing, or B, viewing it as a living document. It is neither. You take it as is in the most literal sense. And it is not a living document because we can actually, when we've gone over this whole point, referring to the Ninth Amendment, it clearly states it was never meant to be viewed as a living document. And this is what I went over when we were going over the Bill of Rights. And this is actually something very, very important to understand. Now, when we're talking about why we need to get rid of the bureaucracy is because when you have a permanent bureaucracy sitting there, they're not going to be, on the whole, they're not going to be beholden to the Constitution. They're basically going to have a self-interest in making sure that they stay there, regardless of what ends up happening. And they're going to be more interested in actually continuing the idea of basically existing on the idea of status quo than anything else. And while it's nice and all that we have people like Lindsey Graham calling for an investigation and stating that that the idea of the outcome of the Mueller investigation kind of proves his point on the whole thing, and it's nice and all he did that, but when it comes down to it, is we need to understand is this permanent bureaucracy being there is a problem, and we need to grasp that, and we need to essentially do something about it, and we need people beholden to the Constitution in government only. And if agencies can't make that point, we need them gone. If an agency says secrecy is the most important thing, it needs to go. If an once the agency says that, it needs to go. And if an agency was built upon a lot of behavior in which they're not allowing people to go in there and modify statements, and yet they can go in there and lie, and yet their statements are not punished, then that agency needs to go. This is why we need to get rid of the FBI. The FBI has no actual value. And we know that the FBI has been troublesome since its actual creation. The man who graces the actual name on the building was troublesome so much that the NSA was actually created. And the NSA was so troublesome that, we've had... the NSA was created with it because we had problems with both the CIA and with the FBI, and so we created the FISA court system because we had trouble with all of it, and we thought that would limit them, and it didn't. And now we're at this whole big bunch of garbage, and no one's talking. No one out there is talking about we can do limitations on them. But we need to talk about the problems and do a probe into it. No, removing the people is not going to do it. Is not going to do anything about this. You need to remove the agencies. You need to say bye-bye FBI, bye-bye CIA, bye-bye NSA, bye-bye FISA system, bye-bye IRS, bye to all of it. And if you don't do it, then it's not going to stop. You can't just basically put some duct tape over the actual problem and say, oh, it's fixed. This is not going to be fixed by this whole system. And you're not going to have any change. And this is why the people that actually understand the Constitution understand this. And they understand that you're not going to fix any of this until these agencies go. And you need to start gutting out these agencies and just start slashing agencies like they're going out of business. And this is why when Milton Friedman started talking about how many agencies were added next to how many agencies were taken away, you would actually be appalled with the amount of it. I mean, in the history of the country, we're talking that I think he counted 2 agencies were dropped, and the amount of agencies that were added was appalling. And it shows that there is no respect for the Constitution. When an agency fails, you need to get rid of it. And if we've only got rid of like 2 in our history, it shows, and after so many failures of agencies, We need to understand that basically a failure of an agency doesn't mean get another agency to overlook them. No, it doesn't mean do that. It means actually get rid of that new agency. And this is the solution. And we need to understand that. Now, if you like this post, like, subscribe, click the notification bell. Make sure you share it while you're around social media and on publicly and to your friends. Make sure to check out my Patreon page. And if you can't donate, share it to someone else. And this is about it. And I will see you guys later for a nightly live stream if this doesn't come out after the live stream. Bye, everyone.